The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Meet the Scholars with your host, Senior Student Fellow Libby Krieger.
Welcome back to Season 2 of Meet the Scholars. My name is Libby Krieger, and today I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is an Associate Professor of History here at Grove City College. He graduated from Hillsdale College and received his Master's and PhD from The Ohio State University. Much of his research centers around military history, Spanish history, and early modern Europe. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Libby. I appreciate it.
So, first question, how did you end up here at Grove City College?
Well, in the fall of 2007, my 3-year sabbatical replacement position at Hillsdale was coming to an end, and the position I had applied for at a nearby Spring Arbor University had turned into a part-time position. My wife was a reference librarian at Hillsdale College at the time, and we were both expecting our firstborn, so I clearly needed full-time employment. I went on the job market that year, and Grove City was the only place to take a chance on me, and I'm quite glad they did.
And here you are.
I am.
Glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
And so as a professor of history, how do you teach students to really wholly analyze and understand the past while living in a completely different social, political context?
I think it's more a question of framing, right? So if we start, as you did in your question, by trying to stress the completely different aspect of things, it's going to be an uphill battle for me to engage with students. So that's why I usually choose the opposite approach, right? So I try to emphasize with students to look for ways that, what are universal elements of the human condition that can link us, not only across contemporary spaces, but across the ages as well. So some of these universals would be, we're men and women made in the image of God, that we daily suffer from the corruption of sin, that we're daily touched and sustained by divine grace. And I think it's easier for students to come to appreciate these universals by finding them in the works that were written by people themselves. So I suppose that's probably the reason why I always assign a copious amount of primary source material in all of my classes. At the same time, I think it is important to understand, as you said, that not all cultures have seen things in the same way as we do in our contemporary moment. But I find it a lot easier for students to pursue those differences once they've already established what I'd call like a baseline congeniality with people in the past.
Well, I think it's fascinating you touched on having that completely different premise of universal truths to start at when looking at history. So as a professor who also teaches Western civilization, one of the required courses here at Grove City College, how do you view the relationship between faith and politics having changed over the course of Western civilization?
That's a big one. I guess I'd have to say, I think Plato has it right when he encourages his listeners to consider that the souls of members of a political community change before the leaders do. So in other words, the dominant faith of a culture is going to inform its members where political authority ultimately comes from, right? Whether from above or whether from below. And as a result, it'll inform its political leaders of what is not only politically possible, but politically desirable as well. Okay? Now, clearly, the dominant religion of Western civilization has changed over time. And so we see a change in the types of conversations we have about what is politically possible and what is politically desirable and what, if any, are the limits to the political. So you take Christianity, for example, or even some of the old pagan religions of Greece and of Rome and of the Germanic tribes. These are religions that clearly believed in daily interaction with the gods. And as a result, they crafted governments that were much more limited. Whereas if you look at our modern moment, from the Enlightenment onwards, Western political thought has been shaped a lot more by deism, or by atheism, or even what some are calling neo-paganism. And that, unfortunately, tends to encourage us to give in to more totalitarian impulses, I think.
Well, you really do have some of the most thoughtful insight that I've heard. And even taking your class, I can confirm, great class, Western Civilization with you.
You're very kind.
And so last question here today, do you have any projects or upcoming research that we should be on the lookout for?
I actually have two projects, actually. One is dealing in public history, and that's connected to the National Flag Foundation down in Pittsburgh. So in 2019, a student at Grove City, Elena Peters, and I researched over 60 different events in the history of the American flag, which were then turned into interactive displays that you can see downtown in the Koppers building. Recently, I was approached by the foundation to add 2 more displays. And so I'm going to be looking at the ways in which American state flags reflect patterns and principles that can be perceived in the national flag. And then also the distressing tendency I've noticed in the last couple of decades for Americans to fly subnational and supranational flags over their houses instead. I just wonder what kind of a message the choice of those flags flying say about the unity of American society. The other project is a lot more academic, and it's basically building off a talk I gave at the Ciceronian Society last month. It was entitled Thinking Horticulturally, the Garden as Metaphorical Medicine for Our Modern Moment. It sounds snazzier than I think it is. But it basically encourages us to better understand our place in the universe so that we can better understand our place on Earth and better love our neighbors as we experience the joys that come through the hard, necessary toil of gardening.
Well, it sounds like those projects will keep you busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Meet the Scholars. Make sure you head back to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our Season 2 videos, and head to our website at faithandfreedom.com.